first sign of trouble in Maplewood was the morning itself. Not the chirping birds, nor the gentle rustle of leaves, but the guttural roar of a riding lawnmower, directly outside our bedroom window, precisely at 7 o'clock. My name is Maeve Holloway, and for 42 years I've considered myself a creature of peace, a proponent of quiet Sundays and predictable routines. Our home, a charming, older build on a tree-lined street in Maplewood, Ohio, was our sanctuary. David, my husband, 49 and prone to deep slumber, worked second shift at the time, which meant our mornings were sacred, reserved for a slow awakening and the quiet anticipation of the day. When we moved into this house in 2018, we had a loose understanding of the property line that bordered our driveway and the backyard of our neighbor on the cross street. We'd always operated under the assumption that our land extended a comfortable 3 or 4 feet beyond the concrete edge of our driveway. It was a strip of well-kept lawn, easily mowed with 2 or 3 passes of our push mower. This arrangement, informal as it was, had been utterly without incident. Our neighbor, Mrs. Gable, a woman I guessed to be in her late 60s or early 70s, was a quiet fixture. We de-exchanged pleasantries, a few brief, polite conversations, enough to be civil, to offer a wave when we saw one another, but certainly not enough to consider us friends. She had a husband then, a kind, soft-spoken man who often tinkered in their garden. Then, sometime in 2020 or 2021, her husband passed away. I couldn't recall the exact timing, nor the cause, though I knew he'd battled health issues. The neighborhood felt a subtle shift, a quiet sorrow that settled over her home. But a different, more jarring shift began shortly after. Mrs. Gable hired a professional lawn care service. And that's when the roaring started. That initial morning, the sound was so shockingly close, so aggressively loud that it ripped me from a deep sleep, my heart hammering against my ribs. I blinked, disoriented, staring at the thin pane of glass that separated our bedroom from the world. David, usually immovable, stirred beside me, a low groan escaping his lips. Our bed was positioned with its headboard against the wall adjacent to the driveway, a wall punctuated by 2 enormous, old-fashioned windows that offered little insulation from sound. The lawnmower wasn't just near our house. It sounded as if it were inside our very thoughts. For weeks, this became our rude awakening. 7 a.m. Monday without fail. The relentless drone of the mower, followed by the high-pitched whine of the leaf blower, felt like a deliberate assault on our peace. It was more than an inconvenience. It was a violation of the quiet sanctity of our mornings. I tried earplugs, white noise machines, even pulling the covers over my head, but the noise was simply too penetrating. It vibrated through the floorboards, through the very air. One Monday morning, David, his face etched with exhaustion and frustration, finally had enough. He stumbled out of bed, pulling on a pair of sweatpants, his bare chest still marked by the impressions of our sheets. He peered out the window and let out a strangled sound of disbelief. The lawn care worker, a young man who looked to be in his early 20s, was driving his riding lawnmower up and down our driveway to access Mrs. Gable's backyard. Not only that, but he was standing squarely in our driveway, the leaf blower roaring, directing a torrent of debris towards Mrs. Gable's yard, but also, inevitably, showering our cars, our house, and our quiet morning with noise and dust. Less than 10 feet from our heads as we slept, David strode outside, his usual calm demeanor replaced by a simmering fury. He got the young man's attention, and in a voice that was remarkably controlled despite his anger, stated, "Look, this is my driveway. It's not a thoroughfare for her yard just because it's convenient." The kid, startled, immediately apologized, looking genuinely contrite. He redirected his efforts, keeping to Mrs. Gable's side of the official, or what we thought was the official, property line. We thought that was that. A minor confrontation, a quick resolution. We were wrong. In fact, it was only the beginning. Mrs. Gable, it seemed, had taken David's polite assertion of boundary as a personal affront. From that day forward, the occasional wave, the brief civilities ceased. She wouldn't meet our eyes. Her blinds remained drawn whenever we were outside. A frosty silence, heavy with unspoken animosity, descended between our homes. A year crawled by. The lawn care service continued, but they respected our driveway now, using Mrs. Gable's own narrow side path. The morning assaults had stopped, which was a small victory, but the undercurrent of tension with Mrs. Gable remained. My observational nature, usually a source of quiet enjoyment, became a constant internal monitor. I noticed her quick glances, the way she would abruptly retreat into her house if she saw us. It was odd, unsettling. Then came the leaf incident. It was autumn, and the maple trees in Maplewood were shedding their glorious but voluminous foliage. Our teenage son, bless his heart, was helping us rake. Our town had a service that would come around with a giant vacuum truck to suck up leaves from the apron of the yard, so it was common practice to rake them to the curb. He was diligently piling them on what we considered our side of the invisible line, near the telephone pole that stood sentinel at the edge of both our properties. Suddenly, Mrs. Gable burst from her back door, her voice a sharp, unexpected crack in the afternoon air. "Those are on my lawn." She screeched, her face contorted in a mixture of anger and indignation. My son, bewildered, paused, his rake still amidst the golden pile. He explained politely that he thought our property extended from the telephone pole over. She vehemently disagreed, her voice rising in pitch, insisting it was. It was such a trivial thing, leaves on a patch of grass. I watched from our kitchen window, a knot forming in my stomach. Her intensity felt disproportionate, almost unhinged. This wasn't about leaves, it was about something else entirely. It was about her perception of ownership, a simmering resentment she clearly harbored. A month or so later, I was returning from the grocery store, juggling bags, when I saw her in her yard, attempting to pick up fallen sticks. She moved with a stiff, almost painful grace, a clear indication of chronic back issues. She couldn't bend at the waist, instead, she had to crouch, awkwardly reaching for each twig. My nature, despite the simmering tension, is to offer help when I see someone struggling. "Mrs. Gable," I called out from our driveway, my voice friendly, "do you want some help with those?" There was no response. Perhaps she hadn't heard me over the rustle of leaves or the distant hum of traffic. I tried again, a little louder. "Mrs. Gable?" Still no turn of the head. Then, without even glancing my way, a curt, emphatic "no" snapped back, dripping with pure attitude. I stood there for a moment, the grocery bags heavy in my hands, a mix of bewilderment and hurt washing over me. Fine, I thought as I walked inside. Fine. She was still salty about the lawn boy, but her rudeness felt personal, a deliberate snub that chipped away at my resolve to be the bigger person. It confirmed what my observant nature had already warned me. Mrs. Gable harbored a deep-seated grievance, and it was directed at us. I began to wonder what else she could come up with, what new triviality she could weaponize. For more stories like this, where everyday annoyances spiral into unforgettable sagas, be sure to subscribe to the Neighbours From Hell channel for new Neighbours From Hell stories daily. The next incident was even more bizarre, escalating the passive-aggressive skirmishes into outright public confrontation. My husband, David, was hosing out our trash can one afternoon, a common household chore. The water, mixed with residual grime, pooled at the edge of the street, on what we again believed to be our strip of land. The street in Maplewood, designed for heavy rains, had storm gutters to handle runoff. The water would simply flow into the street's drainage system. It was utterly innocuous, but to Mrs. Gable it was a declaration of war. She erupted from her house, her face scarlet, her voice piercing the quiet afternoon. "You can't do that," she shrieked, gesturing wildly at David and the trickling water. "That's my property, you're ruining my lawn?" David, who had been patiently rinsing the can, straightened up, his eyes narrowing. He wasn't a man easily intimidated. "Mrs. Gable," he said, his voice calm but firm, "I am not some kid you can yell at. Leave me alone." He finished rinsing the can, tipped the last bit of water into the street, and walked back towards our house, leaving her sputtering with incoherent rage. The very next week, a crew of surveyors showed up at Mrs. Gable's house. They meticulously measured, pounded stakes, and unfurled their tapes. We watched, intrigued, as they worked, a strange sense of anticipation building. Had our little property line squabbles finally pushed her to seek official clarification? The thought was almost comical. Within a few days, the answer came. Bright orange flags dotted the landscape, clearly marking the new, official boundary. And to our immense, albeit hidden, amusement, Mrs. Gable's property ended precisely on the opposite side of the telephone pole our son had referenced. She had, in fact, about 5 fewer feet than she had assumed. 5 feet of land that she had fiercely, irrationally, claimed as her own. The irony was not lost on us. All that aggression, all that fury over a strip of land that wasn't hers to begin with. She was, as the kids say, completely butthurt about it. We found it hilarious. A petty victory, perhaps, but a victory nonetheless. We thought surely this would be the end of it. The truth was out. The lines were drawn, but Mrs. Gable was not a woman who accepted defeat gracefully, especially when it came to her perceived territory. A week or so after the survey, as evening settled and I was packing the car for David to head to his night shift, I glanced towards Mrs. Gable's house. What I saw sent a chill down my spine. She was standing at her living room window, unmoving, staring directly at me. Beside her, a large, burly man, a relative perhaps, a new companion, stood equally still, equally fixated on my actions. I was simply doing what I did every single night, loading David's lunch, his work bag, his thermos. There was nothing unusual, nothing provocative, yet their gaze felt predatory, unnerving. I rushed inside, my heart thumping a frantic rhythm against my ribs. "David," I whispered, pulling him aside. "Those people, they're just standing there staring. It's creepy, it's unnerving." He frowned, his brow furrowed with concern. He grabbed the last item he needed, a heavy tool bag, and headed out to the car. As he stepped onto the driveway, the burly man from Mrs. Gable's window emerged from her house. He marched across her yard, stopping just short of the newly flagged property line. "You people are harassing her?" he bellowed, his voice thick with accusation. "All this staring, all these cameras, you need to back off." David, who had yet to even put the tool bag down, simply looked at the man. "Back off," he repeated, his voice dangerously low. "I'm just trying to get ready for work." The situation quickly devolved. Mrs. Gable joined the man outside, adding her shrill accusations to his booming ones. Before we knew it, police cruisers were pulling up our street, their blue and red lights flashing silently against the deepening twilight. It was a whole dumb thing, as David later put it. The officers, two patient men, listened to Mrs. Gable's tearful, exaggerated claims of harassment and surveillance. She sobbed about our security cameras, insisting we had them looking into her windows. We had installed cameras, yes, for the same reason most homeowners did: general security deterrence. We cared zero about what was happening inside her house. The officer, clearly accustomed to neighborly disputes, listened calmly, then informed her very plainly that we were perfectly within our rights to have as many cameras as we wanted on our property. Ultimately, she and the burly man, her companion, were trespassed from our property. In an attempt to be fair, and perhaps to quell her hysterics, David was also trespassed from hers. I, having stayed inside wisely throughout the entire police conversation, received no such official notice. The bizarre part, the truly unhinged part, was Mrs. Gable's deep conviction that we were spying on her. Her constant surveillance of us had clearly twisted her perception. I'd had a brief, forgotten conversation with her a couple of months before her husband passed, when she approached me to gossip about her new next-door neighbor. During that chat, I'd mentioned my impression of the property line, the one that turned out to be so wrong. Her response then: "We've lived here for years, I don't know where the property line is, and I don't really care." Oh, how things had changed. Her not caring had morphed into an obsession, fueled by a perceived injustice, rooted in a completely false understanding of her own land. The incident with the police, the trespass orders, it pushed us from simple amusement to a deeper, more unsettling realization. This wasn't just petty. This was a sustained, deliberate campaign of harassment based on delusion. My motivation for peace, for maintaining the sanctity of my home, was now under a direct, aggressive assault. I was Maeve Holloway, the quiet strategist, and I had witnessed similar property-driven disputes spiral into ruin for families I knew in my youth. I remembered the shattered friendships, the financial drain, the emotional desolation. I was compelled to act, not out of petty revenge, but out of a deep-seated need to protect my own sanctuary from such a corrosive force. My observant nature had gathered the data. My resourceful mind began to formulate a plan. And my unflappable spirit, though tested, began to steel itself for what was to come. Act 2. Struggle, the escalation, attempts at resolution and continuous progression. The air between our houses thickened, heavy with unspoken accusations and glaring contempt. Following the police visit, Mrs. Gable seemed to interpret the trespass order as a personal victory, a validation of her bizarre claims, rather than a mutual agreement to keep distance. The surveillance, already unsettling, intensified. First, the city survey flags appeared. Little neon-colored markers placed last week indicated gas lines or some other utility. We assumed, with a surge of relief, that she was finally going to build a fence, a physical barrier that would, at the very least, restore some visual privacy and perhaps, crucially, define the now understood property line. Our hopes soared. A fence meant an end to the bizarre staring, the perceived invasions. Then the sound of a chainsaw ripped through the morning air. A huge, decades-old bush that had always stood sentinel in her yard, providing a natural screen between our properties, was mercilessly cut down, reduced to a stump and a pile of debris. Our initial excitement for the fence returned, perhaps she was clearing the way for its construction. We were truly cracking up, almost giddy at the prospect of a physical separation. We thought, this is great, problem solved. The next morning shattered that fragile hope. Monday, 6 a.m. I was groggily shuffling our garbage can to the curb, a mundane ritual when I glanced up. There she was, standing in her living room window as clear as day, watching me, just watching, my stomach twisted. The bush hadn't been cut down for the fence. It had been cut down to eliminate the natural screen, to give her a clearer, unimpeded view. And then, later that day, her daughter arrived. Mrs. Gable had two daughters I vaguely knew, and one or both of them were often at her house for hours each day, a fact that had always seemed a bit odd, though not problematic. But this time, the daughter wasn't just visiting. She was carrying something, a security camera. She proceeded to install it with deliberate slowness, pointing it directly into our garage area and backyard, a view that, until Mrs. Gable's purposeful deforestation, she couldn't possibly have had. The humor, the lighthearted cracking up, dissolved, replaced by a cold, hard knot of anger. It wasn't funny anymore. It was a calculated, aggressive move. The intent was clear: intimidation, surveillance, harassment. David, bless his heart, immediately declared his intention to buy 3 more cameras for our side of the house. To freak her out even more, he'd said, a frustrated laugh escaping him. And part of me, the petty part, felt a surge of vindictive satisfaction at the thought. Maybe we were being petty a-holes, but it had started with us simply not wanting people in our driveway. But the quiet strategist in me knew that an arms race of cameras wasn't the answer. My observations over the past year had taught me that Mrs. Gable thrived on conflict, on the perceived injustice of it all. Engaging her in a tit-for-tat would only feed her delusion, escalate the war, and ultimately drain us. My past, the memory of that family I knew whose lives were shattered by a similar dispute, echoed in my mind. Their beautiful home had become a battleground, their finances decimated, their peace of mind utterly destroyed. I could not let that happen to us. The first step was documentation. My observant nature went into overdrive. I pulled out an old, unused tablet and dedicated it solely to Mrs. Gable. Every incident, no matter how small, was logged. Date, time, description. I took photos of her camera, photos of her watching us, photos of the remaining stump of the bush. I started a video log narrating the events, showing the timestamp. The police report from the trespassing incident was scanned and saved. I found myself becoming a meticulous archivist of annoyance, a curator of conflict. It was tedious, consuming, but it felt proactive, a quiet rebellion against her chaotic energy. My research began in earnest. I spent hours online, delving into Maplewood's municipal code. Nuisance laws, privacy laws, zoning ordinances, property line disputes, even regulations on camera placement. I read through forums, legal advice columns, and local community board discussions. My resourcefulness, usually applied to gardening or home improvement projects, was now entirely dedicated to understanding the labyrinthine rules of neighborly conduct and, more importantly, misconduct. I learned about unreasonable annoyance, disturbing the peace, and harassment. I discovered that while cameras generally could be pointed at another property, there were specific limitations if they were deemed to be for the sole purpose of harassment or invaded a reasonable expectation of privacy in certain areas, like inside a home, which hers certainly wasn't doing, but the aggressive surveillance was the issue. The psychological toll, however, was immense. Our home, once our sanctuary, felt like a besieged fortress. Every creak, every shadow made me wonder if she was watching. David and I found ourselves constantly talking about her, our conversations consumed by her latest antics, by the creeping dread of what she would do next. Our sleep suffered. The thought of being filmed, of her watchful, angry eyes constantly upon us, made even mundane tasks feel like a performance. I felt violated, intruded upon, in my own space. We installed the additional cameras David had suggested, not out of pettiness anymore, but out of a desperate need for our own evidence, our own defense. But even that felt reactive, not proactive. And then the fence arrived. After weeks of measuring, of city survey flags indicating gas lines and mysterious underground utilities, the construction began. A crew of workmen arrived, tools clanging, trucks rumbling. Our initial relief, the crackling excitement that had resurfaced, felt justified. A real, solid fence. This surely would be the final definitive end to it all. It went up quickly, a tall, solid wooden barrier. It was on her property, of course, just a few inches in from the new official survey line. The relief that washed over us was almost palpable. Freedom, privacy, a return to sanity. This was the payoff we had been waiting for, but the payoff was short-lived. The very evening the fence was completed, David was outside, clearing leaves off the car. It was a regular routine, part of his pre-work preparations. The light was fading, the air crisp. I was on our back patio, enjoying the newfound quiet, the sense of security the fence seemed to offer. And then the screaming started. It wasn't just yelling. It was a lunatic's shriek, a primal, guttural sound that tore through the evening air. "Stay away from that fence." Mrs. Gable's voice, raw with unbridled fury, pierced the quiet. "Get away from that fence." And then the piece de resistance, the one that truly made my blood run cold. "Leave that fence alone, you son of a bitch." I couldn't see her from my vantage point on the patio, but I could hear every word, every ragged breath in between her screams. David, oblivious, continued to wipe leaves from the windshield. He hadn't even heard her. He certainly wasn't touching the fence. What did she think he was going to do? Knock the damn thing over? Vandalize it? It was utterly, terrifyingly unhinged. When he came inside, I recounted her tirade word for word. He just shook his head, a weary sigh escaping him. I didn't hear her, Maeve. Good thing, too. Didn't want to give her a reason to call the cops again. The fence, in my mind, was a symbol. This is my side and that is yours. But her behavior, screaming at David for simply existing on our side of the very barrier she had erected, revealed the true extent of her delusion. It wasn't about property lines for her. It was about control, about perceived grievances, about a warped reality where we were always the aggressors, always threatening her. This was rock bottom. The fence, meant to be a solution, had become another source of terror. The relentless surveillance, the screaming fits, the irrational accusations, they chipped away at our peace, our finances, the cameras, the potential legal fees, and our mental health. I felt trapped, utterly, completely trapped. My meticulous documentation, my hours of research, my unflappable composure, they seemed useless against the force of pure, unadulterated madness. What good was evidence against a mind so clearly untethered from reality? My motivation to prevent the ruin I had witnessed felt like a naive dream. It felt like we were already in the thick of it, spiraling. For more stories like this, where you question the very sanity of humanity, be sure to subscribe to the Neighbours From Hell channel for new Neighbours From Hell stories daily. But something shifted in that moment. The despair solidified into a cold, hard resolve. I had gone through the polite requests, the careful explanations, the official channels of police reports. None of it had worked. Mrs. Gable didn't respond to reason or boundaries. She responded only to her own inner demons. My strategy had to change. It couldn't be reactive any longer. It had to be precise, non-confrontational in its execution, but utterly devastating in its impact. My role as the quiet strategist needed to move beyond mere documentation to proactive, surgical intervention. I would not allow our home, our lives, to spiral into the ruin I had witnessed in my youth. I would use everything I had learned, every piece of knowledge I had gleaned to bring an end to this nightmare, once and for all. Act 3. Resolution: the confrontation, consequences, and grand payoff: the scream. Leave that fence alone, you son of a bitch. Echoed in my mind for days, a constant, abrasive loop. It was the absolute low point. We had done everything right, everything civil, even everything petty. We had tolerated, documented, hoped for resolution, even installed cameras for evidence and peace of mind. And yet here we were, living next to a woman whose mental state seemed to be deteriorating into something truly alarming. My unflappable nature had been stretched thin, but at this rock bottom, something new solidified within me: a cold, unwavering determination. This wasn't about winning an argument, it was about reclaiming our lives, our sanctuary. The family I knew in my youth, the one ruined by a property dispute, had exhausted every avenue of direct confrontation and legal battle, only to find themselves emotionally and financially bankrupt. Their story was a cautionary tale, etched into my memory. It taught me that sometimes the most effective solution isn't a head-on collision, but a precise, almost invisible maneuver. My motivation, ignited by that past trauma, now drove me with relentless focus. I was the quiet strategist. It was time to unleash my full resourcefulness. I had meticulously documented every single incident: the 7 a.m. lawnmower, the leaf raking tirade, the trash can water, the police visit, Mrs. Gable's camera placement, the destruction of the bush, and finally, the fence screaming incident. I had photos, videos, dates, times, even David's verbatim recount of the lawn boy confrontation. My tablet was a digital archive of her descent into madness. Now, I needed to leverage my knowledge of Maplewood's local ordinances and community patterns. Mrs. Gable's daughters were at her house for several hours every day. This was a critical piece of information. If Mrs. Gable was truly suffering from dementia or delusions, as many online commenters had suggested, then her daughters were either enabling it or oblivious to its severity. My strategy needed to address not just Mrs. Gable's behavior, but also the system around her. I began by refining my research. Beyond nuisance laws, I delved into elder care resources, adult protective services, and the specific codes regarding public safety and quality of life in Maplewood. My observant nature had noticed other subtle things. Mrs. Gable sometimes left her mail overflowing from her mailbox. Her garden, once meticulously kept, was now overgrown and neglected. Occasionally, I'd see her wandering in her yard looking disoriented. These were not direct neighborly nuisances, but they painted a picture of a woman struggling. My plan solidified. It was non-confrontational in the purest sense, requiring no direct interaction with Mrs. Gable herself, nor any further pointless arguments with her. Instead, it involved a precise, multi-pronged approach targeting the effects of her behavior and the conditions contributing to it, all through official channels. First, the camera. While generally allowed, I found a specific clause in Maplewood's municipal code regarding privacy and harassment. It stated that a camera, even if on one's own property, could be deemed a nuisance if its sole intent was to harass or intimidate, or if it captured areas where a person had a reasonable expectation of privacy, such as a direct, invasive view into a specific window of a dwelling, or certain areas of a backyard not generally visible to the public from the street. Her camera, since the bush was cut down, captured our entire patio, a significant portion of our backyard, and the side of our garage, an area that had never been visible before. This, combined with the screaming incident about the fence, pointed to a clear intent to harass. I drafted a formal complaint to the Maplewood Code Enforcement Department, attaching timestamp photos of Mrs. Gable's camera, our own cameras, showing they pointed away from her property, and detailed logs of her behavior, especially the screaming incident, which demonstrated malicious intent. I included excerpts from the police report where she accused us of having cameras looking into her windows, even as her own camera now pointed directly at us. I highlighted the date the bush was cut down, linking it directly to the camera's new, invasive vantage point. It wasn't about our cameras, it was about her intent and the impact of hers. Second, the public nuisance aspect. Mrs. Gable's screaming incidents, while brief, were public. I researched the exact wording for disturbing the peace and unreasonable noise. While one scream wasn't enough, a pattern of such outbursts, coupled with the previous incidents reported to the police, even if they seemed trivial at the time, built a case. I compiled a detailed chronology of all verbal altercations, including the trash can incident and the leaf raking one, emphasizing the unprovoked nature of her outbursts. I submitted this to the non-emergency line of the Maplewood Police Department, citing a pattern of harassment that was escalating and impacting our quality of life, referring back to the previous police visit and trespass orders. This was not a call for immediate intervention, but a formal record to add to Mrs. Gable's existing file, building a paper trail that could not be ignored. Third, and perhaps most strategically, I reached out to Maplewood Adult Protective Services. This was the most delicate part, and the one most aligned with my core motivation. I chose my words carefully. I didn't accuse her of dementia directly. Instead, I reported concerns about the environment and potential self-neglect, all based on my observations. The overflowing mailbox, the neglected garden, which could attract vermin, and most crucially, the escalating, irrational behavior directed at neighbors, which suggested a declining ability to manage interpersonal relationships and maintain peace within the community. I presented it as a concern for her well-being, framed within the context of her disruptive actions. I also noted the presence of her daughters, questioning whether they were fully aware of the extent of her behavioral issues, implying a need for external assessment. This was a direct, non-confrontational path to get the authorities to look at the underlying cause, not just the symptoms. The execution of this strategy was a masterclass in patience and precision. I didn't expect immediate results. I followed up on every complaint, every formal letter. I kept copies of everything. When code enforcement called, I calmly provided every detail, every piece of evidence. When the police department called, I reiterated the chronology, the escalation, the clear pattern of harassment. When Adult Protective Services contacted me, I spoke with a compassionate but firm tone, detailing only my observations, letting them draw their own conclusions. My unflappable demeanor was critical here. No emotional outbursts, just facts, dates, and documented incidents. The wheels of bureaucracy turn slowly in Maplewood, but they do turn. Weeks turned into a month. Then I noticed a change. The camera pointing into our yard was gone, just gone. One morning I woke up, and where the intrusive lens had been, there was now only the empty space of her house wall. A small but significant payoff. It meant my code enforcement complaint had been effective. I felt a surge of triumph, a quiet, internal cheer. But the grand payoff was yet to come. A few days later, a car I didn't recognize, a plain sedan, parked in front of Mrs. Gable's house. Two women in business attire, not her daughters, went inside. They stayed for hours. I observed them, a flicker of understanding dawning. This was likely Adult Protective Services. My strategic intervention was working. The ultimate consequence unfolded over the next few weeks. The frequent visits from her daughters lessened, then ceased altogether. The house grew quieter, darker. Eventually, a for sale sign appeared in her front yard. A few weeks after that, moving trucks. I watched, a silent observer, as the remnants of Mrs. Gable's life were packed away. I never saw her again. I learned, through discreet inquiries to an old acquaintance at the city's records office, that the accumulation of nuisance complaints, combined with the findings from Adult Protective Services regarding her mental state and the inability of her family to adequately care for her or manage her behavior, had led to a difficult but necessary intervention. Mrs. Gable was moved to a specialized care facility, and her daughters, overwhelmed, decided to sell the house. The legal pressure, not from me directly, but from the city, police, and APS, had been the decisive factor. It was a non-confrontational eviction, achieved through the systematic application of law and community concern. The peace that returned to Maplewood was profound, almost unsettling in its completeness. The roaring lawnmowers no longer woke us at 7 a.m., no more shrieks about leaves, No more fits over trash water. No more creepy staring, no more intrusive cameras. Our sanctuary was restored, the quiet hum of our home returned. My motivation to prevent the ruin of our lives had been fulfilled. It wasn't about revenge, not truly, but about reclaiming what was ours: our peace, our privacy, our right to enjoy our home without constant harassment. The true justice was the restoration of our lives. The house sat empty for a few months, a silent testament to the conflict that had unfolded within its walls. Then a young couple with two small children moved in. They were quiet, friendly, and respectful. They even mowed their own lawn. We exchanged polite waves, occasionally chatted about the weather. They never screamed, they never stared, they never installed cameras pointing into our yard. They respected the property line, but there was a lingering thought, a final, surprising twist that stayed with me, a quiet hum in the back of my mind. One sunny afternoon, as I watched the new neighbor's child chase a ball into their freshly mowed backyard, I noticed something new. Tucked away on the far side of their yard, barely visible from our perspective, a small, unassuming security camera, pointing not at our house but discreetly towards the side of their own property. I smiled. Perhaps in Maplewood, a certain degree of quiet vigilance was simply the new normal. A gentle reminder that even in newfound peace, the world always had its watchful eyes, ready to observe, to document, and when necessary, to strategically protect its own. It seems everyone in Maplewood has become a quiet strategist in their own way. For more Neighbors from Hell stories, don't forget to subscribe to the Neighbors from Hell channel for new stories daily.